So now I want to introduce Dr. Carrington. She's getting to really know us well. I've seen her, I think, 3 times now. Eh, Jody? Yeah, she's excellent. You guys are going to enjoy the evening. Dr. Carrington is a registered psychologist who's been living the dream of practicing psychologist since 2005. She's worked in Nova Scotia. She's worked for the Alberta Children's Hospital here in Calgary, and she now lives with her family in Olds, where she's raising her children. Living the dream of having a rural private practice developed, and now Jody's big love is speaking to the most anyone about the power of relationships and listening to anyone who wants to tell their story. I think I'm not going to give any more because I'm going to give Jody more time to speak. So at this point, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Jody Carrington.
Okay, Calgary, how are you friggin' doing? There is not a kid in the room. Who's on date night? Some of these guys are like, I didn't know this was date night. Who got drugged here by their date? I know, they're like, they start like this. Okay, I'm so excited to be back here. So as some of you might know, we did this in March. Is it still March? It is still March. In January, thank you. It's March now, so it could be a long night, team. And I'm excited to be back here. So I'll tell you a little bit about where I come from and how I started this process. I grew up in Viking. Does anybody know Viking? Alberta, Canada? Woo! Come on. Home of the Sutters? Yes? No? You had a Sutter coach your Flames for friggin' ever, by the way. Okay, so that guy. So we're known for the Sutters and the Kinsella gravel pits, and they are synonymous to me because that's where I drank with the Sutters. in the Kinsella gravel pits, and it was in that little town. I started. My education was K to 12, one school. And it was probably some of the best years of my life. And it was during grade 10 that one of the most popular kids in our class was killed. And it was a teacher who made me believe it was going to be okay. Her name was Holly, and the 26 of us had never experienced anything that big before, most of us anyway. And she made us believe that it was going to be okay. And she kept us connected to Neil's parents. And I remember thinking at the time, that's what I want to do. I want to make people feel the way that she made us feel. And so when I went home to tell my dad, I think I want to be a psychologist, he said, thank you, Jesus. Like, I will pay for it as long as you stop drinking at the Kinsella gravel pits. So 13 years later, I got this PhD in clinical psychology, and he's still working at the Esso in Viking. I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. Not really, but kind of. Okay, so in the course of that time, I started my this whole journey in psychology at Red Deer College, which I don't remember much of those 2 years. It was a good time. Billy Bob's. Anyway. This is starting off right, Catholics, isn't it? Is there anybody in the room who could pray for me? Because I really feel like this isn't how you should open. Anyway. So, and then when I went to the U of A and I did an undergrad there, and I did an externship with the RCMP. And I started learning about trauma and what that looks like in families, how it shows up in families. And my dissertation was on police marriages, because I think we do a really unfortunate job in this country of supporting our police officers, our EMS personnel, firefighters, and they taught me so much about that process, so much so that I wanted to be a cop until I realized I don't take direction well. So it was like I could either go to Depot or I could go to the University of Regina and be a police psychologist and tell them what to do. So that's the route I chose, which was very good. And in the course of that time, my residency was in Nova Scotia, and they said, you need to do a rotation with kids. And I said, I don't like kids. And I don't really, actually, like kids. And they were like, sorry, you have to. And I was like, fine. And I fell in love with the little buggers, you know? Do you know what this is like? You understand this? Yeah. And I realized we even know less about kids in trauma than we know about adults in trauma. And when I came back to Alberta, I took my first position was at the Alberta Children's Hospital. We have some ACH alums in the room, and that was the most phenomenal experience of my life. So just a little heads up, like you probably shouldn't take your first job on a locked tertiary care inpatient unit, which I only figured out after we were there. And because those kids and families taught me more than anything had ever taught me in grad school. And here was one of my biggest learnings when I came out of this unit. 15 years ago when I started, it was the center of excellence in the city and certainly in southern Alberta. But they based their program on a behavioral model. Okay? Which is how many of us were taught, how many of us sort of believe parenting should be, this whole consequences and reward thing. You know, if you just take enough stuff away from a kid, they'll do what you want. Huh? Which seems like a little dumb, but okay. This is how we were all trained, yeah? Here's the problem with the model. It's based on a rat. Okay, it's really funny. See, in the 40s, we were like, okay, how do we manipulate behavior? Here's, like, look what happens when you give a rat a shock. It stops doing what you want it to do. Ooh, fancy. And if you give it colored water, it does more of what you want. Okay, I see. We shock kids. We're just going to extrapolate from a rat to kids. Like, it was a bit of a big jump at the time, but we were like, no, I think it's going to work. And Pavlov came along similarly in around that same, and he was like, look, it works for dogs. So we were like, sold. Let's develop every parenting program, every educational program based on a rat and a dog. Yeah? Because it makes sense, right? You know, you should be able to reward a kid enough for them to do what you want them to do, and if they're not doing the behavior you want them to do, just take stuff away until they get it. Yeah? It's not a good choice. You should tell them they're not making good choices, yeah? See, this works for dogs because they don't have a prefrontal cortex, yeah? They don't have long-term memory. They don't have this sort of emotional center that sort of makes them connecting, that allows them to connect to things, but kids do. And so as various people at the time, we're going to talk about one guy today who tried to make sense of that, and he said, like, you know, kids are a little bit different than dogs and rats. Should we not think about, like, the importance of the relationship? We were like, ooh, that's a lot of words. Let's just stick with the shocking. So fast forward to now, we have a group of individuals we call our children that we are just so confused by. See, like, we can't take away enough stuff to get them to do what we want. Shocking. I've taken away everything this kid likes and he won't be kind. That's dumb. Like, when in the history of telling somebody to calm down has calm down worked? This is what the whole thing is based on, though, right? When is the last time your husband said to you, just calm down? Did you go like, son of a gun? Dude, this is why I married you. God. Do you want to make out? Right? But we do this, and even we have our behavioral programs in our schools set up around, we got to tell you when you're not making a good choice. We got to tell you when you're in the red. We got to tell you, huh? When is the last time somebody said to you, calm down? Did you go like 10-4? Huh? But we do this every day. And so when we were at the Children's Hospital, you know, we had really dysregulated babies there who from ages 4 to 17, we tried to make sense of in 6 to 8 weeks. And we took a very behavioral approach, right? If you didn't make a good choice, you were in hospital pajamas and you served a 24-hour loss of privilege. Huh? That didn't make sense to many of us. And so we started saying, what is important in this process about the relationship and connection so we can help these babies understand how to make good choices, not just what good choices are, but what does that mean, yeah? And so we started talking about this relationship stuff. And it was amazing because at the time then, around the same time I met my husband, who was also old, because by the time I got a job, I'm old. And, you know, the parents were panicking around, like, are you gonna have children? Like, you should really go on a dating site. And what do you want from me? Like, be a doctor, get married, like what? So I get a husband, and he has a PhD in animal science. So he feeds cows for a living. This is what this guy does, yeah? I'm sure it's very hard. And it turns out he likes kids, and so he says we should get one. So we do. And And then I realized being on a locked inpatient unit is way easier than being a friggin' parent. You understand me? So I was having a near psychotic break, and he's like, you better go back to work because you seem to be better with kids with significant mental health difficulties than our own infant. And I was like, 10-4. And then the bugger put twins in my belly at 36. Okay? So I own 3 kids under 2, and I don't even like them. Things are going south fast, and you know what he says to me? I know what will be helpful. Let's move closer to my mother. So I wake up in Olds, which is where we still live, not very far from my mother-in-law. So at the time, my mother-in-law, you should know this about my mother-in-law, she's an EA. And she was, in the history of behavioral EAs, one of the most behavioralist EA you've ever met. Okay, do you remember these group of EAs who understand how to tell everybody how to raise their children? Do you know these people? Mm-hmm. My mother-in-law was one of them. Now, I've since converted her. And I love her more. And if anything ever happens to Erin, I'll marry her. But anyway, here's the deal. And I should just also say, EAs are the most important people in any school division. If you have a baby who works with an EA, you should be kinder than you've ever been to anybody on the planet, because the only reason an EA is hired is for kids who struggle significantly. Kids who need somebody to help them through the process, yeah? And EAs, unfortunately, are the guys who have the least amount of job security. They're paid the least, yeah? And sometimes are the least educated. But we give them our babies who struggle the most, yeah? So that whole process doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So the EAs in Asher School, or my kids' school, I bring a lot of booze to. Did you see, your trustees didn't see that, so I just did that. Every time I don't want them to see, and the chief is back there too, so every time, you know it's gonna be good if I do this first, because they won't know. Okay. Anyway, okay, so I start talking to my mother-in-law about the behavioral stuff that's happening at school and in their classrooms, right? So we're breastfeeding the children together. She's very helpful. She's not breastfeeding. That'd be weird. I am. She's supporting the process, yeah? And she's talking about what's happening in their classrooms and how kids who are really behavioral, she calls them, struggling significantly with behaviors, how they are assisting them in sort of making good choices. And so we had lots of discussions about what might be helpful in the classroom, given what we've been doing the last sort of 15 years at the Children's Hospital. And gosh, I'd love to come in and chat to some of your teachers about that. And so she was like, fine, as long as you bring food. So I did. Food and teachers, I am telling you something. It is the way to their heart. If you want a teacher to like your kid, front load them. Bring stuff at the beginning. At the end of the year, forget the friggin' Tim's cards. At the beginning, bring them stuff, because then they'll like your kid. I'm just kidding. They all like your kids. But if food becomes so critically important, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. So what I think is really fantastic about this whole process is when she let me come into the school, the superintendent just happened to be in town, which is really, I'm sure, happens all the time. But there was a bit concern about my swearing, that I might corrupt the staff, so they had to come in and just observe the outsider, you see. And that was 2 years ago, and since that time, I've been in most every school division in this province talking about what we're going to talk about today, which is relationship and connection, and how critically important that becomes for our babies. And when we give our kids to our educators, they spend more waking hours with our kids than we do. And so in the run of a school week. So in understanding the importance of the relationship and connection, teachers, educators, bus drivers, EAs, caretakers become some of my most important people on the planet. Because of my 3 babies, when I know I can send them to a school system who understands more than anything that the relationship is the most powerful thing, that's how we change the world. Yeah? So since a couple of years ago, I just keynoted the Alberta Rural Ed Conference talking about this stuff. How do you call it, like the Minister of Education, the big shooter? So he's listening. We are way ahead of things in Alberta. So they've asked me to keynote the National Rural Ed Conference in Saskatoon to talk about this stuff in a couple of weeks in March. And then we're going to go to the national conference to take in Denver, Colorado in terms of what we're doing in this province. So we are far ahead of the game. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that is true here today. But let's if we take it from a parenting perspective, so when I told you this parenting thing is the hardest thing on the planet, I don't have to sell that to anybody. And the deal is because everybody has got a friggin' opinion about how to do this, yeah? Do you own a mother-in-law? Yeah? There is lots of ideas about how to do this right. And what I'm going to tell you by the end of today is that there is no one right way. Yeah? You can do everything that the books say or nothing that the books say. That becomes irrelevant.